Good morning, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel of DevOps.com, and welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by our friends at HPE, and it's on 10 tips to start scaling DevOps. I'm going to get into introducing our guest in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to take a second or so and explain for those of you who are new a little bit of what to expect and how you can interact with us here on today's webinar. We do use the GoToWebinar platform for recording and conducting webinars, and it has a question section built into your control panel. Move probably 2 or 3 buttons down, maybe depending on who you are, 3 or 4 buttons down. And if you click the caret or arrow so it's downward facing, you'll see it expand. We've set aside some time at the end of today's webinar for questions, and if you'd be kind enough to type your questions in real time, they are queued in there. So you don't have to worry about forgetting your question, which is often happens to me. And this way, they are queued, and we will be able to get to them. And if for some reason we have so many questions that we don't have time to answer them all, we will handle that as well. At least we'll have a written record of it, and we could answer them off webinar. For those of you who, I know the first question is always, is this being recorded? Will the slides be available? Yes, the webinar is being recorded. It will be on DevOps TV within 24 to 48 hours, as well as the slides available via DevOps.com. Also, I wanted to just briefly point out to you the chat section of our webinar control panel. On our webinars, we use the chat section to indicate people, if you have a technical problem, maybe the audio is not working well or the video isn't working, the slides aren't progressing. If you're able to type into the chat section, we do have a webinar engineer standing by who will help you, and they can take care of that for you. So please feel free to use the chat section if you have any technical issues, and the question section if you have questions. With that being said, let us move on. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is 10 tips to start scaling DevOps. And I'm actually hosting the webinar today, but I'm joined by a friend of mine, Ashish Kuthyala. Ashish, if I messed up your last name, I apologize. Ashish is Senior Director for HPE, and he is a key person in HPE's Agile and DevOps marketing and actually their whole go-to-market around product and everything else. Ashish, welcome to DevOps.com webinar.
Hey, thank you, Alan. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here with Alan. We have long history of chatting about a lot of topics, and we usually have a good time, and I hope that everybody here on the webinar enjoys it as well.
I'm sure they will, if it's anything like our others. So Ashish, let me kick us off here with kind of the opening premise, and that is this troubling statistic that bubbles up, and that is, unlike 3 or 4 years ago, Ashish, when we first started talking about DevOps, today many organizations have started, or at least claim to have started, on their DevOps transformation journey, right? We see every year at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, Gene Kim's Enterprise Summit, more and more companies standing up and telling their story. In London this year, of which HPE is the premier sponsor of that event in London, I think it's June 5th and 6th, we'll see literally dozens and dozens of large organizations who are adopting DevOps. But the statistics right now are a little bit, I don't know if they're misleading or just troubling. 73% of organizations have started DevOps in some form, but only 10% of organizations have fully embraced DevOps. And I always wonder, is that because we're so, it's so new that people are just starting to get their heads around it? It's probably a similar or even a higher split in cloud, right? 95% of organizations probably have some infrastructure in a public cloud, but it's probably less than 10% of their total infrastructure. Same thing here, 73, overwhelming majority have started some DevOps, but only 10% are totally doing it. What do you attest that to, Ashish?
I think, Alan, change is hard, and DevOps, adoption is a hard change, right? Because if you really think about the traditional way that organizations have grown up along with their business and adopted IT practices or software development, teams delivering applications, there have been two factors, right? One has been that applications for a majority of the larger enterprises were a way to support their business. And I think it has fundamentally changed. I think almost every industry right now has to start looking or is already looking at software as being a main driver of engaging with users. It's fast becoming the way to kind of make revenue, make sales, engage with customers on customer support. We see a lot of retail businesses going out of business. Why? Because everything is now going on to an Amazon or an eBay, where people are just hopping in and engaging with their software to buy things, to interact. I don't even have to go to a store. And so a lot of companies have started to kind of like look at software delivery or applications as a central way to engage with customers. And that's a fundamental shift. So they've never paid that much attention to making that their premier kind of engagement model. But two, even how they were set up, there's a lot of legacy and a lot of teams. And legacy is not necessarily a bad word. Teams have been set up certain ways. Processes have been set up certain ways. Infrastructure has been set up some different ways. And DevOps really calls for an overall transformation, right, of all of the ways you go to market with software, how you deliver it, how you design it, how you kind of, engage with your customers, get that user feedback. And this change is hard. I mean, all the legacy or, current processes, for example, have been put in place for the best of intentions. For example, if you look at the QA or testing teams, their mandate was to never let bad quality software slip out in the marketplace, no matter if it took them 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. And they're built that way. So there's often this, game of ping pong or table tennis. If you think about it, things going back and forth before they find it, but it has to be perfect. The whole spirit of DevOps calls for very experimental learning, fail fast, get it out there, learn from it. The cultural shift, it's a way they have to organize that is different. So everybody started looking at this. That's why it says 73%. But very few companies have completely embraced this till date. But I think this is accelerating.
Yeah, I also think it's a symptom of a young technology, a young methodology, whatever you want to call it, a young movement. And 73% have embraced it or started it. But they've all probably started it within the last, certainly within the last 12 months, not 3 years ago. But that being said, let's look at, we're going to offer to everyone who's registered for today's webinar a free download of our 10 Tips to Scaling DevOps ebook that we've prepared. And coming from these 10 tips, let's take a look at them, Ashish, and share them with our audience and maybe, delve into it a little bit. So here's tip number 1. And Ashish, like you, I talk to a lot of people, organizations doing DevOps, organizations that want to do DevOps. And this is a very common question, right? How do we kick this transformation off to do it correctly? Is it a bottom-up process? Is it a top-down process? Is it a middle-out kind of led initiative? And my answer is yes, yes, and yes, right? But it also depends on your own particular situation, right? Depending on the size of the organization and the how the organization functions today, it could be bottom up, top down, or middle out. But Ashish, I want to make one point, and then I'm going to ask you to comment. No matter how you started, bottom up, top down, or middle out, without some sort of top level support, I just don't know if if DevOps succeeds or a total, that transformation can really happen. What do you think?
So I believe in the three yeses that you just said here, right? And this is true not just talking to a lot of customers that I do, but also within our company that we have adopted and started rolling out and scaling up at the enterprise level. So, there's definitely value at the bottom layer, and I don't want to call it a bottom layer, but these are the people at the forefront. They're exploring new technologies, new ways to do things, and there's a lot of good ideas that need to be harnessed that works for that organization. It is really important to have the executive backing to make this happen. And, we touched upon this a little bit, but as you go down this path, it's not perfect, but the business pressures and timelines are very, very real and very hard. So unless you have mandate from the top executive management that it's okay to go experiment, we know that you will not get it perfect, but we're backing you here, let's move in that direction, it doesn't happen. But actually, to me, in our own experience, it's the middle layer that is really, really the most important piece.
Amen.
Because they're the ones who actually drive it, right? In our own example, in our own experience, the middle layer was the one who took the thing by both their hands, got involved, and kind of encouraged the teams. There's different roles they have to play. There's different tools they have to adopt. There's different cultural changes. So your incentives, the way you drive them, the way you start to pilot these things. To me, actually, the middle management is under the most crunch here, and if they don't buy out on it, it doesn't actually work to roll it out at an enterprise level.
I agree. At the end of the day, I think it's, especially on an enterprise level organization, right? It's one thing if you're a startup or maybe if you're a unicorn and you don't really have well-defined strata of management, right? It's more of a flat organization. But in the traditional enterprise, those middle managers are the people who who make the happen, who make the magic happen, right? Yep. On the other hand, though, and Ashish, I'm interested in your thoughts on it. I've heard, when I travel around, that sometimes middle managers are not supportive of DevOps because somehow they feel job security threatened or the like. What do you think about that?
So, you're right about that. I think it's just like any other change. You will either adopt or, the writing is very clear on the wall, right? I mean, it is kind of not acceptable in this new world order to be slow, to be stodgy, to kind of be resistant to change, right? And there are entire companies dying out who are not actually managing this change by grasping it with both their hands and running with it. So, it doesn't matter if you adopt DevOps as a methodology or a culture, or you adopt any other change. But the reality of the matter is you cannot go to market every 18 to 9 months anymore, right? And so if they don't embrace it, then somebody else will come along and eat your lunch. And so I've started to see the change where they realize this is the new way out. They have to retool themselves. So, when we talk about DevOps, it's necessary for a lot of the, actual practitioners to move out from just a very specialized role, but to get to know the entire stack. And that's hard, right? Know enough to know what's happening in the entire value chain. And similarly, it's not enough for middle management to just kind of give directions and walk away. They actually have to lead this hands-on. They have to get into the weeds. They have to actually get their hands dirty. And those who are doing this, they are being most successful, right? So I think there is no option here.
Agreed. Let's move on to tip number 2. Define the elephant. And, Ashish, again, especially like HPE is a great example of this, but any large organization, you weren't born yesterday. There's decades of culture, decades of organizational, of organizational inertia, if you will, to overcome. And it seems almost the bigger the organization, the more the inertia that needs to be overcome. Because as you mentioned, change is difficult sometimes. No one raises their hand. Well, maybe when we're voting for president, we all want change, it seems. But within organizations, we're not so quick to do change. How, having gone through it at HPE and amid everything going on, what recommendation would you have there, Ashish, for people?
Right. So, one way I try to describe this is creating and delivering software applications. It's not very different from, say, any other manufacturing process. Right? Let's just take the example of manufacturing a car, where one team works with the next one, hands them over the finished portion of their work, and the next team then, kind of does their work, passes it on, etc. Delivery pipelines are kind of the same, right? But there are bottlenecks along the way, and that's why, it doesn't get from one end to the other really fast, or the feedback doesn't come very fast. If you don't really have visibility of what to fix and where to fix, then you can't start to fix the problem. If you don't know what you don't know, then you just don't know it. And so it is really important to understand the end-to-end picture, to start to deep dive and understand, where the issues are. And honestly, it's an incremental journey of, kind of improving this. I like to use the word Kaizen. I probably use it twice, but that's a Japanese word for continuous improvement. It's a word used often in their manufacturing processes, right? And so, unless you know how the end-to-end picture looks like, which is defining the elephant, understanding the different parts and who's doing what, it's very hard to address it. You want to start to attack the biggest bottlenecks first, because it doesn't matter if you solve the small ones or the medium ones, or if you don't solve the biggest bottleneck, that will be your weakest link in the entire end-to-end chain. And so it will take you that much time minimum to kind of push through the deployment pipeline.
Yep, agreed. All right, let's move on to tip number 3. And this one, automated testing is crucial. So let me back up and say, I think to be successful with DevOps, automation itself is crucial. But certainly, one of the hottest areas, the hottest buzz, when we talk to people in the field around DevOps, is this idea of, are we eliminating QA? Should we automate testing just because we can? How much testing should be automated? I mean, there's been a whole industry that's popped up now around automated testing as a service. How important is it in your mind, Ashish?
Extremely important. I think lots of organizations actually start here. So, there's a number of things that are happening here. One, DevOps is also essentially about moving a lot faster than we have moved before, right? There's a whole host of principles behind, what you want to adopt and how you want to do things. But honestly, quality is something you cannot compromise. I think, in fact, if you do quality well, you increase quality as you do DevOps, or as you adopt DevOps. Let's think about a few different things, right? As you tend to move code faster into production, you cannot afford to bypass tests to kind of, get there faster. You need to do a couple of things. In fact, it's not that QA is going to get irrelevant here. I think QA needs to take this hands-on and actually lead and drive this change, because you need to build in quality at every aspect. It should be all pervasive throughout the organization. Some things to think about, right? I mean, as code changes are happening, in a good deployment pipeline that has been, that's in practice, you are checking in code, whether it's 3 lines of code or whether it's 20 lines of code, all the time to be production ready into the main trunk, into the deployment pipeline. So that fundamentally means you need to be testing continuously. As 3 lines of code come in, you need to get on there, make sure it's production ready, which includes unit testing, functional testing, it includes security testing. It's all part of it. Typically, these functions would be siloed, but they would also take time to go through. Can you really afford to run the 20,000 tests for the 3 new lines of code you introduce, or do you want to run through a specific section of the test? How do you determine that? Can you look at your data, historically and make some predictions based on that? So, you need to look at that. Can you really run manual tests anymore, or should they be automated, API-driven tests? Because you want to push a button and try to move that code to production. Can you really have manual handoffs and errors? You need a way to, automatically deploy the test infrastructure deployment, because that can take months for a lot of organizations. You want to run the right scripts of tests. You want to record them and, give immediate feedback. Because if you don't give that feedback now, it's irrelevant, because the developer switches his context when you come back to him or her. How do you mirror extremely complicated, test scenarios? For example, if your code change may affect a credit card transaction, do you really want to set up that infrastructure, that processing, that, each time you run this test? No, you need a way to kind of like simulate this. So you need to virtualize a service like that so that, you can invoke it, you can run that test and quickly get the feedback and move on. If you're doing mobile testing, how many different mobile sets, different carriers, networks, you need to be able to simulate that kind of network itself. So there's a lot in there that you have to think about, and automated testing is extremely crucial, because we no longer have the time to do this by hand. And, and once you start doing it in an automated fashion, it has a couple of other benefits. One, it's repeatable every time you change code. Number 2, it leaves a very good audit trail. Who did what, where, when, and then you can easily, go back and look at, where there might have been a failure or where things might have been done well. And automation also allows you to kind of scale up. Automation also allows you to share this across teams where everybody can do it in the standard way.
Yep, absolutely. And I would mention one other thing when we talk about automated testing, Ashish, is let's not forget security. There's no reason we can't automate security testing prior to deployment. All through shifting it left, all through the process here. We could automate testing as we put code in a repo, right? We could automate testing as part of our CI/CD pipeline, and when I say testing, I mean security testing now. There's no reason that any code or app that gets deployed hasn't been thoroughly security tested prior to deployment, right? When code is committed and everything else. And number 2, I mean, and that's not to excuse doing security testing post-deployment, but, so much of that can be automated. We do have the capability, with a lot of the tools out there today, to test the app code and test this code in an automated fashion prior to deployment, before something bad's going to happen. So, when I talk about, yeah, makes sense?
Absolutely, Alan. I touched upon it, I didn't elaborate on it, but we, both with our customers and ourselves, incorporate security testing very early on in the cycle. And there's actually 2 elements to this, right? You talked a little bit about the tooling, which I can talk about. We actually have tooling. We have solutions that make this happen. But there's a cultural aspect of it. So typically in a traditional model, testing is held at the end, right? Security testing. And it's that point where you find a lot of issues, and it can go back to the drawing board, even to the stage of planning the actual, change, because it might have been planned wrong. So what we are trying to do is also, encouraging the testing team to be an integrated part of that product team, where they're involved in the planning, they're involved with the development and the testing phases, because they can give you inputs on what will work, what will not work. How do you need to design your application? What do you need to kind of do to meet the security, compliances, standards, security holes, flaws that are known? But then we give them the tooling too. HP has a number of security products that actually are integrated into the dev cycle, whether it's like a spell checker, as the developer is writing code, we have something called dev test inspect. It starts to flag security errors that you might be violating. You can fix them right away. Once you check in code as an automated part of the process, it runs through dynamic analysis, static analysis, and then it goes on, and we have tools all along the chain where we're testing for security. It has to be all pervasive, right? Just like any other test, security is part of testing. You're absolutely right.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to our next tip, which is tip number 4. And so I call this one the Tower of Babel tip, which is, the nice thing is when we have standardization, it helps us to bridge silos. In order to talk to each other, we have to talk the same language. And all too often, just between dev and ops, we talk different languages, right? And you start adding QA and security and some of the other siloed, folks into the mix, and now everyone's talking over and under and through each other, but not at each other. We don't understand what it is we're saying. And standardization of terminology, standardization of processes, just of operations is such a key piece if you're really going to bridge the silos, that's at the very heart of DevOps. Ashish, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think if you want to scale up at an enterprise level, global level, standardization is an absolute must, right? And it's kind of like anti-DevOps matter if you use the word standardization, but I think in reality, a lot of people actually do this. And this is how they scale up. Whether, for example, automation, we just talked about. Automation really does help you standardize. Because if you think about my role, no matter what it is in that entire deployment chain, every day when I come and do something, and if it's manual, I may arrive in a really good mood because I slept well for 9 hours and I might do everything perfect. But I might just be, involved in a, car driving, road rage kind of like, incident, and then arrive at my desk, and I might not be thinking right. I'm a human. I might actually do it not to the right standards, or I might actually have errors. If you automate, you've standardized it. Everybody else can use it. If you standardize, using containerization, techniques in which, your infrastructure is standard from development all the way to production, so that, you're not looking for varying infrastructure configuration and setup and having to test your applications in different standards across the environments. That's standardization, right? But there's a lot of process standardization. There's a lot of infrastructure, standardization, tooling standardization, so everybody kind of knows how to use the same tool. For example, in HPE, any change that happens to the deployment pipeline has to be done through code, and it has to be checked in, right, into the repository. So everybody, number one, it's what we call an inner source. Everybody has access to that. You can leverage what everybody else is doing and pick up the best practices. But then there's a standard way to introduce change into the pipeline. And it's not based on, if a different person is working that day or if a different team thinks another way. Pick the best practice, which works for everybody, and standardize it.
Agreed. Absolutely. And you're right, Ashish. It is sort of counterintuitive to the, quote unquote DevOps way. Because, it's of letting everyone be who they are, what they do. But again, I think it's also a thing that you see, when you look at patterns, and, this is something, again, at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, you get a chance to really see patterns develop when you hear all these companies talking. DevOps starts off in sort of small pockets within these large organizations. And first it's one pocket, then there might be 2, 3, or 4 pockets within the organization that have a DevOps, or a DevOps project underway. And they may not be standardized, right? They may each use a different tool. They may each use, different terminology. But at some point, if you're going to bring those pockets together as we seek to you know, go enterprise-wide with this. It has to be standardized. I think another area where we see that is Ashish, and HPE is probably a great example of this too, where you have a lot of M&A activity, right? You bring in an organization who has one set of tools, you join another organization that has another set of tools, you introduce a third organization, has a different set of tools, a different way of doing things. It's hard to bring a cultural movement like DevOps when you have, all of these organizations coming together without standardization. And I think it's crucial.
Actually,
Agreed?
there's another, really, agreed. And very quickly to comment on that, as everybody has seen in the news, Hewlett Packard Enterprise as an organization is going through some, tectonic shifts and huge mergers, huge divestitures, spin-offs, etc. And our IT team has actually embraced DevOps, and standardization was a big driver for that, because they had to do it so many times that codifying it and standardizing it and taking the DevOps approach to it has helped them do the next one faster with more quality built in because of the learning they had the first time. The third one, even more. You're absolutely right. In situations like that, and for us, it has been a big driver of why we have adopted this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it almost becomes a necessity. I mean, I have, in my own past history, I helped back in the .com days. We did a company that early ASP, we went public and eventually IPO and then eventually bankrupt. But we did 30 acquisitions in 36 months, right? And this was before there was standardization, before there was a DevOps, before there was cloud virtualization. And I got to tell you, it was running 30 different IT teams is what it was. And it was, and wonder why it failed. So yeah, I mean, kudos to the HPE team for leveraging DevOps to actually accelerate that process. Let's jump to tip number 5. And so this one is consider embedding ops, right? And we mean ops into your dev team. So what are the big, and this comes out of a survey that asked, what were the biggest internal issues impeding DevOps adoption? So 38%, almost 40% of people said, well, it was really hard to put our fingers on benefits in the ROI, and it became difficult to justify the effort of adopting DevOps on a wider scale. 35% said we just didn't have the right skill set here at the organization to do it well. And then 32%, a third of the organizations, Ashish, said there was just, maybe it was inertia, maybe it was something else, but there was organizational resistance to DevOps adoption. And I can't help, when I look at these things, lack of right skills, are they people skills or are they technical skills that are lacking there? I think the benefits and ROI kind of argument, look, I come from a security background. I've been hearing that for 20 years too about how, what's the ROI of security. The good news is again, a DevOps Enterprise Summit in London next month. Actually, Jez Humble and Nicole Forsgren are going to be presenting about some research they did at DORA and a recent white paper they came out with that clearly shows ROI and benefits of high-performing IT organizations that are adopting DevOps. But Ashish, let's talk about embedding ops into the dev team, or for that matter, embedding security or QA into these teams. How do we, who's the right person to embed? How do you get the organization? How do you get the teams to accept this? Any insight there?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is the cultural resistance, right? Because I've had a situation where I had a VP of Ops and Apps in the same room. I got, their teams kind of didn't even know each other, right? Well, and they admitted to that, and they were trying to change that. That's why they were in the same room. But as we talked to them, the VP of Apps kind of plainly said that, look, I'm incentivized. My bonus is paid out on how fast I can deliver innovation out in the marketplace. And I do that through software, which means rapid changes all the time should hit the production environments. And the VP of Ops said, yes, I understand, but you have to understand that my bonus and my job, in fact, depends on stability. And every time you introduce something, it creates chaos. It could create chaos and actually bring down my system. So I'm very resistant to what you want to bring into my system. And I'm very skeptical. I, pay a lot of attention to what's going on. And, if you start doing this now every hour or every day instead of once a month, I will push back. And that's why we push back. We need to work a way around this. And I think that's the organizational resistance that you're just seeing, right? The benefits in ROI, for production, it's again, their incentive is to keep things up and running and to, have an SLA with maybe 5 or 7 lines available. And so for them, the ROI lies and benefits lie there, not like in, incremental changes to the application itself. And as a business overall, the benefit, but, their immediate kind of incentive is to keep everything stable. And their skills are kind of based on keeping things stable, not managing change every minute or every other minute, right? So I think, when you start to bring ops into the product-focus-oriented teams that DevOps teams do, or do the cultural change that we talked about, which is bring them early on in the cycle when you're designing and creating the app, have them understand what impact it's going to have to their environments, or have excuse me, actually have the operations team educate the development team of what will work and what will not work. You start to now have a collaborative approach on how they actually develop and release things to production. That really starts to help. You can start embedding, you can shift left monitoring tools that ops uses. You can standardize the environments they use and have dev use the same environments. There's a lot of things that which fall under embedding ops that helps.
Absolutely. Ashish, we're running so far behind, I'm afraid we're going to have to move a little faster, but this is important stuff that we really want to hit. So our next tip, number 6, is accelerate learning. And again, it's what, you can go for certified, there's no lack of DevOps training classes now from various organizations. But I don't think that's what we're necessarily talking about here. When I talk about accelerate learning in this context, it's about teams learning how to work together. The op guy learning what the dev guy is, the dev guy learning what the ops guy is. I've heard a few organizations now tell me that one of the things they do, Ashish, is they make a dev sit in on a week of customer support calls and actually hear from customers who are using the apps that these devs help develop, right? Or they sit in a week of ops, so they see what the challenges are for the ops team in deploying these applications, because there's no substitute for actually, living the situation. And to me, those are the kind of learning experiences that we can, of course, training never hurts, but those kind of learning experiences are important. And, but they don't happen ad hoc. You need a real plan to do that, and obviously to do it as fast as possible. And maybe I'm wrong on what accelerate learning or maybe it has other context too, and I'll leave it to you. What do you think?
I'll very quickly touch on this. I know we want to, but you're absolutely right. You can always send people to learn some kind of tooling or automation, and this is not about that. This is about, like you said, people learning from each other. For us specifically, it's also if a team is doing DevOps well, right, and the changes they have gone through to learn, can they help other teams learn from their mistakes and pick the best practices? So just like we talk about Target in this, in this guide you put together, where they have dojos. Actually, we inspired by Target at one of the DevOps Enterprise Summits. We have started our own dojos internally as well. And what we do is we actually bring a team who wants to get on board with a team that's already doing this well and actually solve an actual problem that they're struggling with hands-on. So these are practitioners for a week. and actually assimilate them into this experience and work with them hand on hand to get them up to speed and running. The idea being that 2 or 3 of those folks will become the next set of trainers, like train the trainers. So there's that aspect of it. That's one really good way of accelerating this, on a global scale at an enterprise level. The other thing in learning that we don't talk about often is DevOps is new. DevOps is, different for every organization. So learn your lessons on what's working and also learn your lessons on what's not working. And, if you fail fast, learn, and move really fast after that. Incorporate that learning into your journey.
Yeah. You know what, you can't say that enough. If you're going to fail fast. If you're going to get to, if the answer is no, get to know fast, right? Because that's how we move along there. But learn from those experiences as well. Let's move on to tip number 7. Focus on legacy systems. I haven't seen one of those discs in a long time, but but Ashish, this is again one of probably the biggest things, not complaints, but concerns that I hear from people about adopting DevOps, and that is we don't have a green field. We have a brown field, right? We have a muddy field, and it would be great to just turn everything over on the cloud and put everything in containers and immutable infrastructure and all of these things. That would be fantastic. But we have legacy systems. We have legacy systems that run on mainframe, on big iron. We have legacy systems that will never move out of our data center. We have stuff that's written in old languages that maybe don't have modern kind of capability. What do we just kind of leave? Do we treat those like the educationally challenged children in a school, and you get into this whole bimodal IT system? What do you recommend, Ashish?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely hitting the right points here. So typically when people think about adopting the DevOps methodology, they really think about user engagement systems, right? The ones that engage with the users most, the website, their mobile app, etc. But the reality is, number one, a lot of these are supported by backend systems that also need to react fast enough if you're making a change in there. So you cannot ignore legacy systems, and if they are the biggest bottleneck, you need to focus on them. Otherwise, you can go really fast at the front end, the back end. If you don't make the changes, it doesn't help. And the longer term solution here is looking at microservices, transforming in monolithic kind of infrastructure or architecture to more microservices. But to get there takes time. So in the interim, or to get there is to look towards things like service virtualization, what we talked about. How do you virtualize such services to kind of move faster? How do you start to change the processes around the legacy systems? Even as you're looking at changing underneath, the architecture or the fundamental kind of monolithic architecture towards microservices, you can look at service virtualization. You can look at the processes around this and see, how can we make that more supportive and faster to support the fast-moving organization.
Absolutely. Okay, let's moving on here to our. We're going to get through it here. We're at tip number 8, and it's own the system. So Ashish, we put together this ebook that we'll make available to everyone, but when I think of own the system, to me it's in terms of don't let the system own you, right? You should own the system. And for so many organizations, people come and go, but the system stays, and the tools stay, and the culture stays. So how can we own the system? What's your advice?
I think it's what I look at this as, don't let the system define you. It's the exact same thing you were saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a system and you have to move, and it's true that you can't just forklift everything and just go to a new system or a new architecture. It ties very closely to what we just talked about, right? The system can be new, the system can be old, it can be a hybrid mix, you might have constraints, but look at how you can leverage that today to move faster. Whether it's virtualizing, the services that the system provides, whether it is, long-term kind of replacing with another system, which has got components of microservices and API-driven, kind of interfaces. But till you do that, find ways to work with the system you have. Often you can change a lot of the processes around it. Often you can change, a lot of the ways you access that system. We talked about service virtualization in testing, right? Sometimes it's just too slow. The systems are too slow that you're working with. So virtualize those services and, make it part of your automated QA testing.
Yeah, excellent advice. Let's move on to tip number 9 as we run through these. So this is another, this is a really modern way of it, but, smooth the jagged edges with APIs. So, we hear terms like we're in an API economy, and I forgot where I was, maybe it was at DockerCon a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how, this whole ecosystem of tools and, feature sets and products and services are integrated in a Docker, and how, in the old days, what a nightmare that would have been. But in today's world where, we have APIs for everything, it seems, that even people like me can integrate, and we do it here at DevOps.com, right? Our Slack and our MailChimp and the Salesforce and the HubSpot and all of these things, it's like magic, but they all communicate and work together. Not, and maybe we take it for granted because we live in this world. It's a great time to be alive in IT, but we shouldn't overlook how important it is that, these APIs really kind of make it happen.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to name the company, but in this company, DevOps adoption has been there, I think, from maybe day one. Maybe not day one, from a very early on. It's one of our leading retailers, putting a lot of other companies out of business. And if I'm not wrong, their CEO actually issued a mandate to everyone, saying, "Thou shall always use APIs. And if you do not, it's a fireable offense." Right? I don't know the exact wording, but
that's API or die.
It has, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the point of the story here is to solve problems like you're talking about, right? Their approach with APIs has really helped them scale up. I mean, their scaling is amazing, right? I mean, you're talking about almost single-handedly being the largest retailer in the world almost today. And I don't know the exact details, I've read about it, I've heard about it, but you do want to take an approach like this, especially, if you're building up and scaling really fast, or even if you're looking at, existing systems and how do you have them interact with each other.
Absolutely. And by the way, as widespread as APIs are now, I really think we're just getting started. When you start talking about IoT and these kinds of things and how we're going to interact with different tools and devices and so forth, it really is the API that's going to be the glue, right? That pulls.
You couldn't manage it any other way.
No, I mean, not efficiently. I mean, it would be a nightmare, just a nightmare.
Right.
All right, let's jump to our final one, which is tip number 10, and that is to look for waste. So Ashish, I'm not talking about the efficiency experts in office space, where we're coming in and looking to fire people or cut budgets, that's not it at all. But I don't care what organization you're in, from a little organization to a large organization. We go through it here at DevOps.com even, where we'll review how we're doing things. And it never, ever is not it's always the case, I'm giving a double negative. It's always the case where we find things we should do it much more efficient. If we did this instead of that, we'd be faster, better, more secure. Better for our customer base. We should never stop looking for waste within, and I think this transcends DevOps. I think it's in business. We should always be looking for ways of doing things faster, better, more efficiently. So I don't know what else you could add to that, Ashish, but feel free.
No, I think we've talked about this. If you look at it from an end-to-end perspective, we talked about the visibility factor of it, right? The elephant example you gave.
Mm-hmm.
You need that visibility. You need to know where the bottlenecks are, because you're only as good as your bottleneck, right? It'll slow you down. And you'll often find the waste in those bottlenecks. Right? The biggest bottleneck will show you the biggest waste. In fact, so much so that sometimes you attack the biggest bottleneck, you will have improved your, end-to-end kind of speed and quality, right? Factor of 4 or 5 sometimes. Right? Attacking the biggest bottleneck is hardest, but if you attack that first, you will find the waste there. You'll be able to take it out. You may not succeed the first time. Again, this is part of that fail fast thing. Get on it, learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process of continuous improvement. Never stops.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great way of looking at it, Ashish. The looking for waste should be built into your process of continual improvement. I think that you just nailed it with that one. Okay, so that's our top 10 tips, though, and we tried, Ashish, but we're a little past where we thought we'd leave. But we have a couple of questions here, and if the audience has any questions, type them in. For those of you listening in on this on the recording on YouTube, on DevOps TV, apologies, but if you had a question, you could always send it to editor@devops.com, and we try our best to try to get those answered for you as well. But so one question from audience, Ashish, is what would you recommend, someone who's not even middle management, they're ground up grassroots, how do you approach upper management to get their buy-in? Is there a particular book or a methodology or something they could say that you've seen kind of work?
I mean, there definitely are a couple of books. We mentioned the author Gary Gruber in these tips, but
Mm-hmm.
Gary led very large-scale transformations in 2 big companies. One of them happened to be the HP laser jet printing business, which is HP
Yep.
Incorporated now, Inc.
Yep.
And then at another major retailer, and he had to go through the same thing. And he writes about his experiences from both a executive as well as hands-on. What are some of the things that you can do? And he's released 2 or 3 books, Leading the Transformation and a Practical Approach to Large-Scale Agile Development. And there's a 3rd ebook that if you send us a request, we'll send that to you. I have copies of that. But again, I think those provide a lot of background. My own advice would be that we talked about it in the beginning. Run a pilot. Run something that shows efficiency about how you do today at a small scale. You will learn. If you fail, it doesn't make a big impact. And once you can start to do that repeatedly, take that learning and share it with your management. They're always interested in, like you said, continuous improvement, doing things faster, better, cheaper, with better quality. So, pilots are usually the way to prove the concept in your organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next question, Ashish, is how long should it take? So from the time you decide to, how long should the DevOps transformation take is the question, but I'm going to add some, flavor to it. So we decide we like this DevOps thing and we're going to try to adopt it. We'll start with a pilot maybe. How long should it take until we see some, an enterprise-wide type of DevOps take hold?
I really don't have the answers for that, Alan, to be honest. I mean, I've seen anywhere from a few months to a year to, a couple of years. But I think, like I said, if you start showing results, even in incremental, batches, and if you can start showing results to the biggest bottlenecks first, you will find that the momentum shifts and changes to support you. People will come and want to be involved.
Yeah.
People will give you the sponsorship to move forward. Some of these big, large transformation projects have taken anywhere from 6 months for a big project in an organization, but not enterprise-wide, to 18, 24 months. But it's always ongoing, like we say, right? I challenge anybody to say they have mastered DevOps and they're done. There is no done, right?
No.
You can still find ways to kind of keep getting better.
So Ashish, if we're going to end this in a moment, and if we're going to end it, I think that what you just said is what to end it on, and that is, if you're going to master DevOps, you're never done, right? It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing. It almost takes on a life of its own. It's an ongoing way of doing things. You don't, it just doesn't end. You don't wake up one day and say, oh, we're done here. It continues going. And that's a great way to end it.
There's a job security question that you talked about. You'll never run out of a job.
Right, exactly. Well, that's a good reason, too. But Ashish, first of all, thank you so much. I apologize. We grabbed you on short notice here, and you were kind enough to step right in, and as I expected, you hit it out of the park. I appreciate you joining us today on this DevOps.com webinar. For all of those who have registered, for those of you who are on live, we will send out a thank you note with the link to download this ebook on the top 10 tips for DevOps transformation. And also, if you want to write to us at editor or at DevOps.com, as Ashish mentioned, we do have. Well, Ashish, I'll forward them to you. You can get them the new Gary Groover ebook. I think I have the first 2 chapters of Starting the Transformation available for download as well on DevOps.com somewhere. And I would recommend both of those books, actually. But there are others. I mean, obviously, we mentioned Gene Kim and the DevOps Enterprise Summit. Both the Phoenix Project, obviously, and the DevOps Handbook are great books to learn by.
Great books.
Yep. I would definitely get them. And for those of you who are listening to this today or in the near future in Europe or in London, please join us. Ashish, you'll be there. I'll be there. Join us at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London on, I think it's June 5th and 6th at the QE2 Center, where we will hear from probably upwards of 40 or 50 organizations that are, along their way on their DevOps transformations. So you can find out more about that at DevOps Enterprise Summit. Ashish, again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for hosting, Alan. It was a pleasure.
Yes, we'll have you on again soon. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. We hope to see you again on another DevOps webinar. Have a great day, everyone.